Hey, Ron Newcomb here with the Indie Coach Podcast. I'm here with my new friend Anthony Baden Saggers. Did I get that right?
Saggers, but
Saggers.
that's okay. I've heard worse
Yes, that.
pronunciations.
Well, we're just gonna kind of dive into it, of course. That's the way I love to do it. So, Anthony, just kind of shooting right out the gate here. I would love to hear what actually inspired you to transition into the creative industry, and how did your early experience kind of shape your artistic vision?
Um, Interesting question. There wasn't really much pivoting, I suppose. I'm not one of these people that started off in a non-creative industry and then kind of pivoted into being a creative. It's just always been the way that it's been, whether that was as a composer for adult life, moving into filmmaking. I think it's just something that I've never had a choice but to do for whatever reason that may be. Um, and well, sorry, just to clarify, when you say my early experiences, do you mean my early experiences as a human or my early experiences as a creative?
Yeah, as a creative.
Um, that's an interesting question. I suppose. So originally I trained to be I trained, I went to what you call in the US community college and later university, which you guys call college or university, depending on where you're from or what your kind of preference is. I actually studied film, assuming that that's what I would go on to have some part in. And then I fell into making music, and I just continued doing that for a long time. And I suppose my early experiences probably made me think that a small amount of success was enough to sustain some kind of meaningful career. But my focus was always on the art rather than on. And unfortunately, I kind of wish I'd had maybe a mentor or someone that could have told me earlier on in my life, look, this is all very well, but at some stage you got to put food on the table and you got to, make sure you got electricity. Otherwise, you're not going to be making too much music and you're not going to be able to release any more albums. So it's a difficult one to answer. I was quite lucky in that my first couple of albums that I made ended up getting released by small record labels. And as I said, that probably made me think that I could sustain, myself more than I actually could. It's become
Yeah.
a long process of understanding that you have to kind of balance the real world with your desire to create art. So sorry, that's not a very good answer.
No, no, I think it's an honest one. And quite honestly, I don't know that our society actually wrestles with that enough because what we do is we always tell people to follow their passions. And although I understand the sentiment of that, the practicality of being a dad of five little kids and having a house and a mortgage and, the whole thing, requires a sense of responsibility as well. And so you can't just run after the passion without, a care to the world. If you want to have things outside of that, there is a bit of responsibility that has to be done and kind of get stepped up with. And I think a lot of times particularly to our youth, we kind of tell them to just go for it and throw caution to the wind because that's what dreams are made of. And that's what we all have our passions around. But I don't know that that is actually the best advice anymore. And I just recently, in fact, I've been kind of reevaluating that very kind of follow your dreams, follow your passion kind of understanding. And again, I understand the sentiment of it, and I feel it in my soul that that's the right answer, but there is another part to it. So, no, I think that's a very honest answer. Was there a pivotal moment early in your career that signaled to you and certainly kind of solidified you that, okay, the creative direction is the way I want to go?
Honestly, I feel you were talking about, feeling something in the pit of your soul. I don't think I ever had a choice really. Um, and I'll be honest, I mean, I never had a fallback plan. I wasn't one of these people that, studied to be, something that you could do as a 9 to 5 job and pursued my artistic endeavors on the side. So I don't think there was I couldn't pinpoint any one moment. That's just it. I feel like have no choice. Some of us are born artists, I believe, and that's just it.
Yeah,
It's the way it
exactly.
is.
Yeah, you could try to fight it, but it would be fighting the very nature of kind of who you are. And I do think that where some people are set aside and intended to be kind of those truth tellers, those storytellers, um, in ways that are different than other people. How do you approach kind of currently integrating music, because I believe that's a good portion of your background into the visual storytelling to create kind of that cohesive narrative experience. We all know, any one of us that watches movies, which is going to be, in the billions of eyeballs, we all know the power of music, and there's certainly been movies over the years that have captured that, where it was so pervasive that you couldn't deny that the music played a key role in it. Star Wars, Jaws, Indiana Jones, all those films, you think of the music just as much as you think of the visual medium. So how do you, when you're creating as a creative, and for those people that, because I meet a lot of composers actually in this industry, a lot of musicians, a lot, actually more than actors, which is crazy. Because
It's definitely very oversaturated. Sorry to cut
yeah,
you off, but
yeah,
it's definitely over the last few years, over the last 10 years, more and more the ability to make music with a computer, which I'm not at all knocking because been the basis for my ability to make music, from a fairly underprivileged background. I mean, if you go back to the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, unless you had the money to really, be able to pay for studio time or to be able to pay for equipment, you weren't going to be making, the kind of music that you could make today. But with the proliferation of, how would I say, tools that make it easy to make music with the minimal amount of skill, because I think that's what a lot of, instrument makers and these kind of people are producing now, are things that, anyone with a rudimentary ability to hold down a few keyboard keys can say, look, I made this. And so I think, and also a kind of the popularity of it in the public perception has kind of changed. It used to be kind of a geeky thing to do. I think that wasn't very cool to be a composer for films and for music. Unless, I mean, of course, you were John Williams or someone, at the top level. But the 1% obviously don't ever represent everyone in the pyramid underneath. But so I think it's so oversaturated now that actually I hear that so much that, and I get my inbox is now flooded now that I'm a producer, director, with composers trying to tread the same path that I did. And yeah, it's brutal out there for a composer. So sorry, feel free to carry on. I just wanted to say it really is an oversaturated industry at the moment.
yeah, no, it really is. And, I think we all recognize that the creative journey is going to be an uphill one. I think we inherently kind of know that, but I don't think you really understand kind of behind the scenes until you throw on that producer moniker, and suddenly you realize, like, oh my gosh, there are a lot of people doing music out there for that. But again, you have the benefit of kind of having that composition music background, but now also, as you said, kind of producer director. So how do you kind of integrate your music into your visual storytelling?
So for me, I guess the process is slightly different if I'm making something myself, and I'll go on to that as the second part of my answer. I think it's all about communication, right? Everything in film ultimately is about communicating something to the person that's watching it. And so I think just as much as the image, the music, you have to approach it with the sense of, okay, what are we trying to communicate here through this music when we're putting it to the image? Because you're trying to communicate, you could simply be trying to communicate the tone of the film, the tone that you feel the director and the actors and everybody involved is trying to convey. And then there are certain pieces of the film where the music is trying to convey something kinetic, like action. You mentioned Jaws, you mentioned Star Wars. If you break all of the different, let's take Star Wars as an example, right? Something that, I watched a lot when I was a kid. If you break down the different elements of the music in Star Wars, you have the themes, which are supposed to kind of communicate that huge, epic, operatic, grand space drama. You have the big thing, and then you have the ones that are supposed to convey individual characters' motivations or their place within the film, and then you have pieces that are meant to communicate the sadness or the melancholy of certain scenes, and things that are supposed to communicate, the kind of kinetic energy of spaceships and whatever they call them, AT-AT walkers, just about to crush somebody. And it's all about what are we trying to communicate here in this, and how can you express that musically, and how can you do it in a way which is hopefully uh, harmonic with the kind of the intention of the director and all the team involved in it. And now my approach to, and I should say I've only made a few short films. I'm on my way to get making my first feature, and so that's going to be a new journey for me. But when I approach making my own projects, the music is very much something that sometimes aspects of the textures or the kind of the mood exists before anything has been shot, a long way before. Sometimes for two of my scripts, especially one, a series that I wrote called Man is the Devil, the music actually was something that I was making at the same time that I was writing the script. And I'd listen to it to kind of put me in this place where I had a kind of a continuity of a tone that I was trying to achieve. And I'd compose a piece of music, which may not necessarily end up being in the finished thing, or it may appear in a slightly changed form, but that's been far more kind of something that grows from the beginning as part of like what am I trying to convey tonally, or what do I want the atmosphere of this thing to be. And then, you know, I just I just made a little short film for no money with an iPhone a few months ago, because I was kind of bored of sitting around, with my producer's hat on, dealing with numbers and budgets and all of the kind of the nuts and bolts things that as a creative, you have to do that if you want to produce something. But it's also anyway. But I'd put all of my money into getting this thing made, so I didn't have any money to go out and make a short film, but I just wanted to go and make something. And my partner, bless her, said, "Well, I've got this broken up old iPhone." And I said, "Great, let's go and shoot something." And I set myself, the limitation of just going and shooting mostly at night, no external lights, no crew, just me and my girlfriend, who's not an actress. And I said, "You're going to be my actress. Let's go make something. Let's push this little iPhone, which isn't one of the newer ones, because the newer iPhones are actually pretty bloody incredible what you can get out of them. But
Oh, yeah.
this one, you can shoot in 4K, but the quality is really not what you can get from the iPhone Pros or whatever. Um, Long way around saying the music for that became so integral to the feeling of the film. And I think that's the main thing, is that you're trying to make something which is integral to the finished product in a way that emotionally resonates, hopefully, with the audience in a way that expresses more than a film without music could.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely is there to enhance, even I would say kind of flavor it a bit. What does your creative process look like when you're starting a project? And then also, if you have any thoughts around navigating creative blocks when you come across them. So a little bit about your creative process, and then what do you do when you kind of hit that wall that we all inevitably hit?
Yeah, indeed. So creative process, I guess it's different with, actually, is it? Is it really? I'm asking myself the question now, is it really different? I think the creative process, I suppose I was going to say, is different when you're approaching music or film, but it's not, because you always start with just this like seed of an idea or a musical motif or something that you want to do. And now, a lot of people have ideas, a lot of people have good ideas, seeds for ideas, but then the difference between someone that manages to achieve something and someone that doesn't is taking those tiny seeds and putting in the work that's necessary to take it to something that's a finished or abandoned. There's that famous quote, a work of art is never finished, it's just abandoned. So however you perceive it, so it's about, it always starts with something small, whether that's, a few chords on the piano or a little melody, whether that's an idea for a script, whether that's just an idea for a scene that you might have, whether that's a landscape that inspires you and you think, oh, I could see this happening there. How about I could see this or these things? So it starts with this little idea that you're then You have a duty to turn it into something that is hopefully somewhat close to the idea you have in your head of the finished thing that it could become. And now the creative block, yeah, that's a tough one, and it's something, we all struggle with, like you said. And I think the way around it is just work ethic. And I learned a lot from two musicians in my life that I admire and get a lot of inspiration from, Leonard Cohen and Nick Cave, who both kind of imparted this idea that it's work, you've got to work at it. There's this idea in the outside society, or in the, external to the art world or creative industries, that somehow artists just kind of sit around doing nothing, and then suddenly you get this flash of inspiration, and then you have this thing afterwards. But I think really what it is mostly is just work ethic, isn't it? It's about just carving and carving away at it. And if you hit a block, and if you're two-thirds of the way through a script, and you just cannot think about how, you can't get to where you want to go. There's some block where you just got to sit there, and you just got to hack away at it and hack away at it and hack away at it and try things until maybe they don't work, and then just keep going. And it's the same with music. You just got to, and the times where, I've lost count of the amount of times I've sat at a piano and wanted to, or have literally bashed my head on the piano keys. Like, what is wrong with me? Why is nothing working anymore? But that's it, it's like climbing a mountain, isn't it? And if you're stuck, well, you can sit there in the midway point of the mountain if you want. But if you want to get to the top, you just got to keep kind of looking for a way to get there, no matter how much it's difficult sometimes. So that would be my advice, is never give up, and make sure you have a work ethic and see it as work. I think it's important for all artists, really. And this kind of goes back to what we said. Apologies, bloody telephones. I've got to put my phone on silent. I do apologize for that.
Right.
The bane of our
Yeah.
existence
So
sometimes. Um, I think it's important, you were saying about, tell kids to follow their dreams. I think it's really important to instill in everyone who wants to be an artist or is an artist. You got to get up in the morning, and it's your job. Even if you have another job, maybe you only get to do it at night. Well, it's still your job. You got to sit down, and you got to put in the hours, and you got to do it, because I think there's very few people who can just have a kind of a blasé approach to making something and actually make something good, you know? And I
Yeah, no,
think,
I totally get
sorry,
it.
carry
Uh,
on. Oh,
yeah,
sorry, say that again.
I was just going to say that I definitely agree. I definitely concur. Not, it's funny because I get a lot of ideas a lot of times, and I'm sure a lot of us do as creatives. And I've learned to write them down and put them into a folder. And I recognize that not every idea needs to be run down to completion. And I also, as someone told me this a while ago, and at first I kind of resisted it, and now I realize the brilliance of it. They said basically, what will happen is take like your best ideas that are germinating in your folder and then see how many you can push together in one story. And so I take like three or four different ideas, and suddenly I'm like, oh wow, that idea over here can work in this story, and it does make it cool, and it's something different and unique, and suddenly that opens up 10 doors. And just like any musician, particularly a singer, they do their scales, and
Hmm.
the scales are the basics, and the pros still do their scales because they're warming up the voice, they're going through the process, and we as artists need to do our scales on a continual basis. And so I get up at 4:30 in the morning every morning because I have kids, and the house is quiet at that time, and I get a quick workout at the gym, and I come back and I'm able to sit down in front of my computer, and so that's my time to write and come up with ideas and write scripts and stories and do my work. And people ask me like, "Oh my gosh, how do you get up at 4:30?" I make myself. It's hard. That's how I do it. I gotta force myself to get out of bed. I want to sleep in too, but I've learned that that's almost like a superpower that is unlocked. And yes, I go to bed a little earlier, but I'm able to do all that before my kids get up at all. And then I do have a W-2. I have a 9 to 5 that I have to do. And then I'm able to, be with my kids and my family in the evening as I still kind of jump in and work from time to time. So I definitely appreciate the tenacity that you got to have to, you got to put the time in, you got to do your scales. And, a day that you're writing, not one word on the page might make it to the finished book, but that's okay. You got to do your scales. You're putting yourself through the process, and every idea might not work, but you're getting them out there on the page. And same, as in film that I've learned along the way too. Um, how do you balance your personal artistic expression with audience expectations and commercial considerations? And I know that last part, the commercial considerations, can be a synonym for a sellout. That you're a
Mm,
sellout because you're trying to appease to the masses. And I've learned that, particularly in film, maybe if I was a painter, I could just paint for painting's sake and I could put it up there. And when I'm, long gone and dead, someone will find my paintings and I'll become famous. And I'm not doing this to become famous. I'm doing it because, like you, I feel it's just in the core of my DNA. And if I don't do it, it would be disobedient to why I was created. And so therefore I must tell stories. And yeah, so I've just kind of learned over the years to consider the audience is really what I think that statement is saying. To me, the audience is everything. They become to me the most important thing, even above my own opinion about the project or my own opinion, even about what I'm writing. So, that commercial consideration, I've had to kind of open my definition up about that kind of rigid sounding phrase and make it give myself permission to be okay with that. So balancing your personal artistic expression with the audience expectation and the commercial consideration. How do you wrestle with that?
that's an interesting question and interesting and a perspective that I can sympathize with. And by the way, very admirable. I didn't get a chance to say you're getting up at 4:30 in the morning to carve out your time to work. It's very, very admirable.
Yeah.
Um, So, when I was just used to make albums and sell them, and when it was still possible to make a living doing that, I'll be honest to say I cared not one whit for anyone's expectations or for the commercial appeal of it. It was purely, that's not to say, that I realized when I had a listenership, they came to me expecting a certain thing. So I wouldn't have just said, well, now I'm moving away from modern classical music and here's a rap album. Fuck you guys. Fuck your expectations. Because, I realize, you want to be in keeping with the kind of the aesthetic that the people that like your art appreciate you for.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it's very true what you said about film. And now, it's a difficult thing, right? Because if you want to make a film, you need a large amount of money. Even if you could be making a film for 200K, you could be making a film for 1 million or 2 million. And as you know, that means unless you happen to have $2 million, people are going to give you that money under the expectation that you're going to be able to give them that money back, hopefully with a significant, percentage on top of that. So you have to balance the consideration of commercialism when you're looking at making a film. But the way I've approached it, or the way I approach it, is I don't allow it to dictate any of the artistic decisions that I make. And now that may very well mean that I end up making a film which is not doesn't have the possibility for being a commercial blockbuster. But I think it's difficult, isn't it? Look, I think I know that I'm not operating in the world of purely art house experimental cinema that is going to have zero commercial appeal, right? But I also know very well that the film that I'm looking to make now, or the films that I'm looking to make for the time being, will have this kind of prestige festival it's on the border between art house and commercialism, which I personally feel quite luckily there exists that niche. There
Yeah.
exists that avenue where films can make two or three times their budget. They can be an artistic success as well as what some people might call a moderate commercial success. And now I would call any film that can two times, three times their budget a success as far as I'm concerned. Now, some people in the industry might say, oh, but it's not commercial because you didn't 10x, you didn't. But it's about what we're trying to do and what we're trying to make and what we're trying to communicate and whether we can ensure that the investors get their money back and everybody, can make a bit from it. The film that I'm looking to make now is broadly a Western, right? But it's not the kind of shoot 'em up Western that everyone's seen many times. It's like a slow burning, people, whether you want to call it an existentialist Western, whether you want to call it a poetic realist Western, whatever thing you want to call it. But there is a niche for the Western. And now everyone talks about the horror genre, and rightly so, because it has a market which will always buy, even without name talent. But I personally feel the Western also, maybe to a slightly smaller degree, you have an inbuilt audience.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking to make westerns which both appeal to, the majority of the Western inbuilt audience, but also to people that would never watch a Western, that will hopefully watch it because it's aesthetically beautiful, it's human, it's real, and it has something that can pull in the people that would say, I'd never seen a Western before. I watched this and I loved it. Are there more Westerns like this? Well, no, not really, but maybe there could be. So I think it's about when you go into something in terms of making a film, it's the choice of the filmmaker, whether they say, I'm going to set out to make something that appeals to superhero film fans. And if you want to do that, great, because that's a huge commercial market. Now, whether you can do that without the money that the big studios have, that's up to, well, good luck. So I think it's about weighing up whether you're trying to make a film which fits. And I hate, in a way, like you're saying, the artist part of me hates to talk like this. But it's about understanding the market that exists out there because when you're making a film, you're going to be needing a whole pyramid of people and a whole structure within the industry to support you and to have a place to put your film.
Yeah.
So but on the other, so it's about understanding, okay, this is the market as it exists. And now I don't just mean the market conditions as they are now, because you hear every week you hear someone saying something new, this doesn't work, that works, these things don't work, that you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. Are in the last 10 or 20 years, have people made films anything like the film that you want to make? Did those films, did the best examples of those films make any money? Did the second best examples of those films make any money? What can you do to make sure that you're more likely to get a return on the people's investment? You know, be as sure as you can. And then after that, I think for me personally, I'm not saying this is a good strategy. I'm not saying it's what anyone else should do. I just don't let it get in the way of the art,
Mhm.
you know? I think, okay, we have this path. There's a market for this kind of film. There is a pathway to it being successful, both artistically and hopefully commercially. And then you just got to be honest, I think. And you got to make the best thing you can make, and you got to be honest to yourself and to the idea, because you will start, as you probably know, as you go down the line, you'll be having people, oh, I didn't like that. Maybe there should be a fucking car chase there. Or, oh, don't you think that that's a bit strange? Don't you think that it should be a bit more like this or a bit more like that? And if you start listening to everybody, you're going to end up with something. You're going to be sat watching your film when it's finished and thinking, I didn't want to make this film.
Yeah.
I don't like that scene. That's what Jeff, an ex-sales agent, wanted me to put in the film. I don't even like that. Why did I do that? And you have to live with that for the rest of your life then. And that's what you're going to build your reputation on. So I think all of film is a gamble, right?
Yeah.
You have to try and make it as well calculated a gamble as you can in terms of taking this minimal risk commercially. And you got to stay true to yourself and be honest. And I think if a film is well made technically, if it's honest in terms of it's trying to express something, or even just trying to make people feel, wow, that was cool when those things blew up. That was awesome. As long as you're trying to be honest about what you're trying to communicate with people, hopefully there's going to be an audience there for you.
Yeah.
It might not be an immediate hit. It might take a few years, but so there, that's a really long-winded answer. I
No,
hope that
I
went
think,
some way towards giving you
yeah.
an answer.
Yeah, no, no, no. I think the answers should be as long as they need to be. I think people, our audience listens in is they're storytellers and they want as much feedback as they can get so that we can learn. And I'm selfishly also want the same thing. So I appreciate the answer. And I think that as much as I was saying about the commercial considerations and all, and it can come off as a dichotomy, I do think both can be true. I think there is a way, and I think you can find a way, Anthony, to have the two in balance. I think
Thank you.
still be balanced in your honesty of your artistry to yourself, and then also understanding that there's a commercial viability that's needed if you want to do your second film. you know?
Yeah, if I'm not exhausted and broken, and I think one of the difficulties now, especially right now, because if you were to go back 10 years when you're in the middle of kind of the Netflix boom, well, they were throwing money at anyone that had an original script, right? But now we're facing an industry that's so risk adverse that it's actually kind of counterproductive because in an industry like film, like I said, that always has an inherent element of risk. When you're dealing with, the money people in the industry that are like, we want to take zero risk, it's like, well, then nobody gets to make anything then, do they? No
Right.
one gets to make anything that anyone's going to care about in a few years, at the very least.
Absolutely.
So as an independent filmmaker now, I think it's about understanding that if you want to stay true to your idea, you're going to have to fight. And it's going to be harder than you think it is. And there's going to be nights where you're like banging your head against the wall thinking it's impossible. But it's about, I mean, if you look through the history of cinema, so many of the best loved films, some studio executive right at the beginning said that'll never work.
Yeah,
Or
exactly.
the script got rejected, or they said, that no one's going to want to watch that, blah, blah, blah. And even films like, The Godfather or these kind of things that were based on huge IPs at the time, very popular books, studios turned them down. They turned the script down and said, who's going to want to watch that? A long, slow 3 hour film, slow burning,
Yeah,
family. And so you just got to stick to the idea, right? And you got to believe as a filmmaker when you get to that other side, you can turn back and say, well, those of you who didn't believe me, well, tough. Because
yeah,
look at it, and
yeah. No,
it's kind of,
definitely.
you got
Yeah.
to be kind of like
Oh, yeah. You got to
so
have that
so
tenacity.
single-minded. Yeah.
Yeah, you need to have that art, artistic. You use the imagery of climbing that mountain. You got to have that because the mountain will defeat you. If you get up that mountain, it's not going to make it easy for you. I call it birthing your film. You have to pull your film into existence. It will fight you every step of the way, but it's your job as the producer to pull the story into existence. Is what I found is like my strongest element. Who are you a fan of, and who is doing it right in 2025?
I mean, who is doing it right? I suppose, I can only answer that from my own perspective. And actually, I'm gonna say I watch so few modern films just because I'm so disappointed with
Mm,
most things that I see these days. Who am I a fan of? So many directors throughout history that I won't bore you with a huge list. Recently, the directors that I've been going back and rewatching and loving their films. I'm on a bit of a Robert Altman binge at the moment, who's a director that really divides opinion. Who I think is, I mean, he was capable of making some films that maybe didn't work, but it's just a master. I've been going back and watching his films and just I'm just amazed by how it's almost like he created a world that just seemed to exist. And it's almost, obviously, it's a calculated effort to do it, but it feels like he has a world that exists and the camera just kind of floats through it and just happens to be there. And you feel like this thing is the world of the film is occurring even when the camera's not on it, which I think is miraculous. Um,
very
I've been
cool.
watching a lot of Robert Altman films recently. I've gone back and watched a lot of Ingmar Bergman films. I don't want to sound like, too pretentious, but it means it's true. Um, Who's doing it right at the moment? That's a really good question. And I think a lot of the really good films that I've seen recently, I'm not even sure if I know the name of the director, sadly. You know, sometimes you just see a film, but you're not expecting to see. You just open whatever streaming service you might have. I open Mubi or whatever, and I watch a film. And sometimes I don't even know the director, and I end up really loving the film. And conversely, you know, I watched The Brutalist by Brady Corbett recently, and I was just crazily disappointed with it. Whilst there's a lot to admire in the film, and I appreciate that someone's still trying to make films for adults because I think that's what like we lack so much in the current kind of film sphere, is like a film that is for adults, you know. Um, but I also thought after watching it, I thought, is this the if this is the threshold for a masterpiece these days? You know, we've lowered the bar. Because emotionally, I found the film so empty and kind of adolescent. The cinematography was gorgeous, you know. Um,
Yeah,
so, like, it's a lot to admire. I you heard of a director, Kelly Reichardt? I think you pronounce her name.
I don't think so. I'll have to write that one
She
down.
made Meek's Crossing, First Cow. She makes these really like slow films that are really human and are really kind of they're kind of quiet and they're grainy in like this beautiful way. Um, I mean, I've always liked the director Wes Anderson, but I starting to find his films have kind of gone off the rails a bit recently in terms of their authenticity to like the human experience. They seem to be more about the spectacle. Well, I'm looking forward to going to see his new film, hopefully tomorrow or the day after that I saw at the cinema. Um, I'm gonna have to, you know, I wish I'd prepared. I would have made you a list. Oh, because you know what it's like. I feel like whenever you put on the spot,
Yeah.
what's the best film you've seen recently? It's like, my brain just goes blank.
Yeah, no. Well,
Like,
I mean, particularly when you're really trying to study it, there are so many, and it might not be, as you say, in the modern context. You know, there's tons of filmmakers that if you are in this business and if you're listening to this, you're probably, you know, in the business or wanting to be, you need to go do your scales. And part of those scales development is going through and understanding film history. And a lot of people talk about this. I mean, no one geeks out more to it than Tarantino. I mean, that guy knows his scales. You can say what you want about him as a storyteller, but that guy has done he's a masterful historian of the art, of the craft, of cinema, of film. You know, I'm sure he's probably one you have thought of when you're doing your Western, you know, because he
I'm
has,
actually not a fan of Tarantino,
yeah,
although I will say I I'm on the fence with Tarantino. I personally don't like his work that much. It doesn't appeal to me. I don't like glorifications of violence. I don't
yeah,
like any of these things. But when I watch a Tarantino film, I'm fully aware of he is such a masterful director at using the camera in a way to express certain things. And
yeah,
so it's like technically he's fantastic. It's just the stories that he's trying to tell, like you said,
yeah,
they don't appeal to me. But
yeah,
one thing I will fight anyone. If anyone ever says Tarantino knows shit about the history of cinema, it's like, well, then you're a moron. Because like you
yeah,
said, the guy has probably sat and watched every VHS that was ever, you know, ever made. And
yeah,
it shows when you watch his films because he studied the masters, you know, he studied Kurosawa,
yeah.
John Ford, all the way to Scorsese and these people, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he worked at a little video store, the way I understand it, and the
Yeah.
locals started to go to him and say, "Hey, what do you recommend?" Because he started to do that, and he got
Yeah.
so good at it that he kind of became a little notorious around his little community about the guy to go to that would tell you about this cool film that you might not have heard about, and it's because he watched them all and studied them. And what I love, and I agree also about his gratuitous stuff in there. But what I love doing is I love listening to him talk about film. It's
Yeah,
like
his passion is crazy. It's really
passion
good.
is like he's in love with film, and you can ask him a question, and he's going to know like the filmmakers and not the modern ones. You know, he's going to know the forefathers of filmmaking from the Italian Renaissance to French to you know, he himself pulled from westerns from you know Spain and
Hmm.
where filmmaking was going on during that time, where he saw a lot of films that he really liked and replicated. And you can, if once you know that, it's kind of like seen behind the veil a little bit to where you go, oh, wow, you can see that in the influence in his work, which is actually pretty cool.
Yeah,
So
really. And
when
I
I
think
was,
the interesting thing, oh, sorry, I didn't mean
no, 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 please.
interrupt. The interesting thing about Tarantino is that because he has that huge knowledge of cinema, I think that's why there's so much written about him in terms of like whether some people would call it just outright stealing or some people call it homage, but it's like in embedded within all of his films, there are small hints, clues, and kind of, allusions to or references to all of these films that he's seen and loved. So there's always lots of levels to a Tarantino film. If you want to watch it as a fellow film geek, that's probably a homage to this Kurosawa film, or that's probably a homage to this, like you said, this spaghetti western that hardly anyone's seen from the 70s, Ringo Rides Again, that he happens to really love. And it's so cool to see people that really love cinema making films, because I think more and more, especially, and I don't mean to badmouth anyone, but more and more I see our society is becoming quite hollow. And I think a lot of young actors, they seem to not be interested in understanding the history of their craft and going back and really watching, the amazing films. And I feel like it's so necessary that it's really, yeah, it's what you want to see. You have to appreciate, like you said, you have to go back and look at the masters. You have to do your scales, and part of that is how was the language of cinema constructed? Because one day, the Lumiere brothers just made something
Exactly.
that could record reality. And
Right.
then people were like, you know what? We could record small bits of reality and like string them all together, and we could make like a book, but it'll move. And then from that, we've evolved to now. So it's like you have to really understand, okay, what is the language of cinema? Even if you want to break it, if you want
Yeah.
to break all the rules, well, you better go and study how this thing came about.
Absolutely. No, you only a black belt in martial arts should be able to break the rules of a white belt. A white belt should not be breaking rules. So when you're just getting started, you need to stick to what you've been taught. But it's not until you become a black belt that you can freely break the rules because you know why they're there and what they are. And you're breaking them as a decision, not as a disconnect or like, shoot, I didn't do that right or didn't understand it. And that goes from basic storytelling all the way to the visual component of it. When I was a police officer for a little bit,
Oh, you're a police officer.
yeah,
Whereabouts in the US are you based, by the way? Where,
so
where, where did you serve in the police?
we all kind of claim Washington, D.C., but I'm actually in Virginia. So
Hmm.
I was a police officer around here in Alexandria, Virginia, and it was an awesome department. But one of the things that they did in the academy was we would watch videos of police officers that were wounded or hurt or did something wrong or even unfortunately killed the line of duty. And as you can imagine, those videos are not easy to watch. And
Yeah,
at
of
one
course.
point, you could kind of look at them from like Monday morning quarterbacking them because usually the officer is the one that made a mistake. Well, not usually, but sometimes it was the officer that actually made the mistake that ultimately led to their death. And you are watching it just like cringing, like, oh gosh, you see it coming. But the reason we do that, Anthony, is because one day we were going to be on the street because we this
Hmm.
was in the police academy and we had to learn the lesson and at minimum let their life be a lesson to us. So that's kind of the essence and the tone of which I'm asking this next question. And so I'm not trying to Monday morning quarterback any filmmaker, and yet I think it's an essential part for you and I and the listeners to understand in getting it right. So the question is, where do you see artists not getting it right? Where do you see artists blowing it? And then also in conjunction with that, where do you see Hollywood blowing it? So take the independent, where are they messing up? And then where is Hollywood messing up?
I will just say, as an English person, I don't fully understand the phrase Monday morning quarterbacking, but I love it, whatever it means.
Yeah.
Um, You know, far be it from me to tell anyone what they're doing wrong. But I mean, you know, we'll get to Hollywood in a minute.
So you know that phrase you just said, "Far be it from me," from
Uh-huh.
that's Monday morning quarterbacking. That's
Oh,
exactly what that
interesting.
phrase means. Yeah, you're pretty much trying to say you're looking at them in the after fact, and you're able to easily judge them because you have the ability to watch them, and it's easy for you to point out all their little faults. But you weren't in
Because
the
they play
moment.
football at the weekend, so
That's
it's
right.
easy
You
to
play football
criticize it
on
on the Monday.
Sunday. That's it. You play
Ah.
football on Sunday and you watch the video, and it's easy to be a critic, right? You can criticize all you want
After the fact, yeah,
after the fact.
interesting.
So
Oh, I
anyway,
learned something. Thanks. I learned something. That's really that's I like that praise. Um, Independent film, I don't know. You know, I personally think whether I like people's independent films or not, I wouldn't wish to say anyone had got anything wrong. You know, because when it's only as you said earlier, when you go into actually trying to do it, you realize how much work and how much dedication and how much passion goes into even the worst independent films.
absolutely.
But I will say there are certain things that I think people should be paying a bit more attention to, which is look, you don't need much money to have slightly better production value, right? If your sound is not well done, you can find somebody out there that will help you and make it better. If you're, I mean, you know, how do you work around an actor not being very good? But I think the way I see I don't want to criticize anyone's work as an independent filmmaker, meaning their films too much. But in the mentality, I see quite a lot of people either wanting to get into it because they think it's going to make them rich and famous and getting into it for kind of the wrong reasons, rather than like, you know, the passion to make something and make this film. Um, and I think maybe perhaps you could say independent filmmakers maybe they're trying to emulate larger budget films too much with a smaller budget, which I feel that it's never really going to come off very well, right? So if you don't have and I fully understand, like I want to do that, but I only have X amount of money. But I think, well, in that case, why not just pare it down? Why not make something that's going to look better at that budget level? And then hopefully you can go and make the thing with the big
Right.
space aliens that come down in the ship and shoot up the town later, because
Right.
then you can actually do it well. Why not just make something a contained little sci-fi film? And I think some people are really getting that right.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Hollywood, look, I mean, I could probably talk all day about just the absolute disaster that I see as the entertainment industry and how it's getting worse. I mean, you know, I think we don't even really need to talk about it. I credit most of your listeners with having the intelligence and the kind of to
Yeah.
look at the entertainment industry and just hopefully roll their eyes and say, and look, I don't begrudge anyone having a big popcorn selling blockbuster film to go and watch if you want to go and watch it. That's fine. But where are the other options?
Yeah.
You know, and one thing that really gets my goat recently, I must say, you've given me a platform to rant, so I'm going to take it for a minute, okay? Basically, when you watch the Oscars or the Academy Awards or any of these things, and hopefully one day I can stand in front of them while I collect my award and I'll say exactly the same thing to their faces, they're all so ready to clap and applaud for what they think is an independent film, you know, and the independent films that make it to that level, you could even argue whether they exist outside of the financial structure of Hollywood and the entertainment industry, right?
Right.
And they're all so willing to sit there and applaud the independent film. Woo, we love independent film. Try getting one of those actors to be in your independent film without meeting their quote. Yeah, good luck. And it may not be the actor's fault because it's the whole system of agents and it's set up to make sure that you just have no chance unless you've already you're at the table. You might be down here feeding off the scraps, but you know, as a first-time filmmaker, second-time independent filmmaker, third-time independent filmmaker with a small budget, it's hell out there. And so it really makes me angry to see, you know, recently there was I forget the name of his film, Anora. Sean Baker,
Mhm.
and it was supposed to be this big, glorious rebirth of independent film. But I mean, even the budget for the marketing of that film was enough for most filmmakers to go and make 10, 20 low budget films. So,
Absolutely.
and I think he made it for like maybe 5 million, but he's done his smaller independent films to work up. So this is absolutely, I'm not, trying to
Yeah.
sully his name. I have full respect for what he's done. But even when we get told, oh, it's a new dawn or it's a new renaissance for independent film, they're not real independent films, you know?
I do
And
know.
I think that really annoys me when I look at the industry because they're all patting themselves on the back and saying, "Oh, we love independent film," but they don't, you know, they don't, and it's still hell out there for independent filmmakers. And I would love the first giant Hollywood actor that will come out and say, "Hey, I'll do a film for like SAG, right? Just because I want to do it for an unknown director." Some of them do,
Yeah.
right? But I think the problem with Hollywood is this constant elitism and a complete lack of perspective about what people actually want to see,
Yeah.
And it's
I
all about the money. It's all about the money and the money. And they're pouring, but the thing is they're pouring millions, then millions and millions into things that nobody actually really wants to see.
No, no. I mean, to your point, they're terrified of risk. They've always been risk
Yeah.
averse, always, but now it's gone to the next level, and it's because films have gotten so expensive
Hmm.
and films have freaking flopped, like not a little bit,
Yeah.
So they haven't lost 3, 4 million. They've lost, 100 million, if not more, on certain projects. So they've even become even more risk averse. And I'll tell you another thing, Anthony, that frustrates me is we, the audience, say we want certain things, but what frustrates me is the numbers don't lie, and we're still now. I You could argue that that's the only thing that's because to your point, like where are the other independent films? Like you can go find a blockbuster this weekend because it's going to come out on Friday, and yes, you can go see that. And where are the other films? But I guess my point is that I hear everybody talking about how they're sick of Marvel films, for instance, and yet they all go, Now I happen to not go, and because I've seen the first like three, and then again, it's not above me. I like those kinds of stories. They're not huge on my list, but my point is that yeah, that we don't have many options. Hollywood is doubling down on the anti-risk statement, and so they're only going to do what they're going to do. So, and I've only wanted as a filmmaker a seat at the table, like you said.
Mm.
And I just wanted my voice heard. You don't have to greenlight my project, but I want to be in the room one freaking time where I'm actually truly pitching a person that can greenlight the project in a real way and to get in those rooms. And I've been represented and I still can't get in those freaking rooms. So they're even kind of there's an illusion, it seems to me at times, where there's a way to kind of get up the mountain, but it's almost like it's rigged. It's a rigged, it's
Fully, yeah,
fixed. Like
indeed.
you're better off doing what other filmmakers do, finding your voice in the independent realm and then going the Hollywood route. But to try to go up like a Lucas or a Spielberg, that is, I'm just not seeing that happening in 2025. I almost think
No.
I don't see a path like that anymore. I think that's gone. I mean, I potentially you could do like a Christopher Nolan kind of thing, but even then, I think you're spot on. I forget the young man. I think it was the Oscars who, when he got up there to do his acceptance speech, he was like, "Hey, for all this money, we could make 10 movies for the $100 million, or we could make 20 movies at $10 million, or we could make 30." His point was support independent film. Like
Yeah, exactly.
we could get a lot more stories told if we spread the money and you don't like the $200 million budgets I just they're I can't even my brain can't even go in that direction because how could you not be risk adverse at that level? And if you just
Yeah.
broke it down, I mean, what could you and I do for $2 million? I bet
Yeah.
you a lot more than what they can do because I've had to be in the trenches and make films like that. So, no, I totally get you. I'm right there with you on that. Um, what are your thoughts on kind of the current state of the creative industry? And I'm more interested in hearing about where you think the industry is headed in the next couple years. And you can or don't have to certainly talk about the obvious kind of thing on the table, which is
AI.
which is technology and AI. But you're also welcome to. I've had people talk, both pro and con against it, and I think I just want you to know you have the freedom to do that here. Don't feel it's
Thank
taboo.
you.
I want to be able to talk about it. I see a lot of good within the technology and yet recognize the generative part of it and also acknowledge how those AIs were trained, you know? And
Mm,
I feel bad for the artist that I can only imagine, seeing a semblance. If you understand AI fully, it's not a direct replication of what was there, but they were fed for it, from it. So does it look a little bit like Frank Frazetta? Well, yeah, but it is an exact Frazetta painting. No, but it sure as heck looks like him, and it's because the AI was trained as such. So I I recognize it, and yet I also understand the power of it and what we can use it for. So I'd love to get your thoughts on maybe current state of the industry and where you think it might be going.
that's a huge topic to dive into. Now, let me try and pick it apart. Firstly, I think it's very true what you say. AI is a huge thing, and maybe it's not a conversation that we should dive too deeply in because, unless your listeners want to listen to us talk about AI for the next 45 minutes,
Exactly.
it's probably something that's best, skimmed over. But what I will say is it has its benefits, not just in the creative. Actually, I see the benefits mostly outside of the creative
Yes,
bit. You
exactly.
know,
Yeah,
for
totally.
medicine, for science, for collating data and being able to make informed decisions based on, you know,
Absolutely.
50 years of research compiled very quickly that would take a human months. That's fine. And now this is I'm gonna, do you want to hear my, what do people call it these days? Hot take or whatever it is.
Yeah.
My controversial take is I actually see the birth or the use or the kind of what will I think will become the predominance of AI created art in society. I see it as one of the precursors to or like a symptom of or a worrying sign of a possible totalitarian society. And I know that might sound insane, but bear with me,
No,
right?
I think you're not the only one out there, I think, saying that.
And I think, artists' role within society is to communicate things to people, and it normally has always been the function of artists to question society's morals, society's ethics, the people in power, and to hold up a mirror to society. And obviously, the artist has always been a kind of a danger to the people in power, unless they are state-sponsored artists. There's a reason why Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany expurged all of the artists that weren't willing to toe the party line because it's a danger to the narrative that the state wants to instill, right? And now, if more and more, and I hope it's not the case, but we've all seen how quickly, everything we see online has just become AI generated, visual chewing gum, basically created by putting prompts into a machine. And now, if I can see a world in the very near future where the proliferation of that is a substitute for anything real because real art will become so expensive and so difficult that people will just actually prefer and corporations and these people already prefer it, I think in Hollywood they're already having those discussions. Hey, look how much money we can save just by feeding people AI generated films. Well, hey, basically the algorithms and the artificial intelligences, if they can be controlled to say, look, don't generate anything based on this or that, and you have artists, I'll put them in inverted commas, who basically are forbidden from creating any kind of art which doesn't conform to the principles of, the society or the people that control the society that they're in. You're going to have, and our generations are different, right? The real danger is when you get two or three, or maybe even just one generation in the future, people that aren't used to a world without this. And you come back to that whole thing that George Orwell wrote about in 1984, where people will lack the ability to express their own freedom. So if you have a society in which most art is generated by an artificial intelligence through prompting, maybe you're not even going to be able to make any art that criticizes the power structure that you live in. And that's terrifying to me, you know? And so to bring it back to slightly less paranoid, I'll take off my tinfoil hat and put it down. Um, One thing I do think, and I'm really sorry, I understand, especially for independent filmmakers. Now, AI is going to give people maybe the ability to create whole worlds that they would need millions and millions of dollars to make otherwise. And now, if you're going to integrate that into a film in which most of it has been done, you know, with a human soul and the drive of human beings to create something, whilst it may not be the route that I want to go down, why not? I can see that there's an argument for it. Using it to basically enhance a work of art or a film that has a human soul. Fine, whatever. I'm sure someone could convince me that was fine, and it was benefit to the independent filmmaker. But what I do think is you see so many people now. It's basically I see it as a kind of a democratization of talent, but not in a good way. It's like previously you had to have some kind of talent and work ethic and drive to be able to call yourself an artist. And now you get people just, I made this, I made that, I made this. Like, well, as far as I'm concerned, my personal opinion, which is always, of course, just my personal opinion, is that those people are no more an artist than someone that calls up a painter and says, I've got an idea for a painting. I want it to look like this and I want it to have these things in it. No more than that person who commissions an artist can say, I made this painting. It's like, no, you didn't. You asked somebody to make that painting for you. And I
Mhm.
see the lines being blurred, at least in some people's minds, between are you an artist or did you simply ask a machine to produce something that you then take credit for? Um, and I think all art, I'm just, maybe you're the same or maybe not. And if so, I respect everyone's opinion and their right to differ from my opinion. But I do think it's worrying the rate at which so many people that I thought would have some kind of moral anger at the use of AI to just jump on board and be like, woohoo, you know? And it's actually really shocked me the rate at which everyone is just like, well, great, let's all just use AI now.
Yeah. I
Quite
heard
scary.
somebody say, well, actually, I'll confess something to you, Anthony, because I think it was
All
a
of my films were made with AI.
so I did do this little prompt, and I edited it and put some music on it and put it out there. And I just said, I made this in like 3 minutes. And someone, rightly so, called me out and was like, well, you didn't make anything, actually. And I thought, as a filmmaker myself, I thought, yeah, you're right. He's right. I didn't make that. I
I
just,
hold nothing against you for that. In fact, I think that's very honest. And the thing is, it's normal for human beings, and I think we've been doing it ever since we were just apes. If there's a new toy in front of you, you
yeah,
pick it up, you play with it, you look at what it can do, and then maybe you're like, meh,
yeah,
you know? I
yeah.
don't want to play with that thing anymore. And I think it's completely normal when I think I generated, a couple of videos just to have a look, and I was like, wow, this is really crazy. So
Yeah,
honestly, I don't hold that against you at all. But I think the fact that actually you thought about what that person said to you and thought, actually, you know what, I agree with that.
yeah,
I think that's really admirable,
yeah. No,
personally.
it was an honest critique by a fellow filmmaker, and I was like, yeah, he's definitely spot on. I did hear something that I think could, in the next couple of years, become something where somebody said there's going to be AI films out there. I just saw a 15-minute short film that actually had a cohesive narrative because that's been kind of the hard thing about AI.
Yeah.
It's hard to hold characters and have a cohesive. This actually did have a beginning, middle, and an end, a character development in a 15-minute short. And yet, what somebody told me was they said, I bet you, like he said, I'll never pay for AI films. I'm not saying I won't watch them. What I'm saying is I won't pay for them.
Yeah.
And he goes, I can see a world where they just put them up on YouTube and people go, yeah, that's cool, neat. I can watch something if I want to. And but he also, by the inference, I kind of deduced in the next year or two, and I could say like in 2 years maybe, when if there is a proliferation of AI, then the human element is going to be a prime commodity that actually people are going to be willing to pay for and want to see and will kind of angle towards.
I
It's like
hope
for
so.
like
Yeah.
like you said, like at first it's the toy and like cool and but that polish is gonna wear off and the shine is going to wear off. And I'm not saying there not going to be some cool films and videos and stuff. I'm saying there is, but I think people are going to want to say that's cool, that's neat. But I really want to see a human made 100%
Yeah.
film, and I'm willing to pay a premium to see that. And that I thought I could see that actually occurring is that more and more of the humanity element is going to be sought after. And in a way, Anthony, that got me fired up about pulling together communities, our fans, is that these fans, we're not just creating something, and the very nature of a film is a visual medium. And so there's the creator and the viewer, there's at least two people involved. And that fan who you basically are kind of making it for because you're creating something to be seen, they become extremely important and you want that humanity on the other side of it. And I thought, man, that's why I think the powerhouse in the coming years is going to be all about community engagement, fan building. Those things I think are going to start to drive the day. And you're already seeing that with influencers, right? I mean, that's what they bring to the table is this huge influential audience. And what if I went to you and said, Anthony, I have this really cool, I've got 50,000 fans that love westerns. Would that be a benefit to you? And now go have a conversation with an investor. Suddenly that's extremely beneficial and
Yeah,
helpful.
of course.
And by the way, I do think things are coming in cycles, as we all know. And I think we're prime for, I was just thinking this the other day, we're prime for a good run of Westerns. I think there's been a lack of Westerns lately, and I'm not really sure why, but I think that cycle is going to come around. And then after that, there'll probably be vampires. But I think you're on to something with the Western thing. A
There'll be
buddy of
westerns
mine,
and then western vampires and then it'll
Western
peter out.
vampires,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. And then the aliens too. Yeah, a friend of mine put together and sent me over a package of a Western, and I thought this just feels right. It feels really good timing, even though Westerns aren't out there right now, which is a great sign because that means that isn't being fed right now. And
Yeah.
yet we know, like you pointed out, there is an audience there. I asked this of people on the podcast. Do you have any books that you would recommend, or do you have any training or workshops that you've done that you would recommend to people? So, any books that you've read, or any training, or even podcast or workshops that you've done?
You mean relating to filmmaking?
Yeah, exactly. Filmmaking, storytelling, composing.
You know what? Because I thought you were asking me about books that I like. But I think I used to read a lot of books to do with filmmaking when I was at university and at college, but I don't think I've read a book on filmmaking since back then when I used to had this huge book called the Guerrilla Filmmaker's Handbook. I don't know
Of
if it
course,
still
yeah,
exists. It probably, but back then it was like the tome.
yeah.
We're talking not pre-internet, but we're talking, on the cusp of the internet actually being something that everybody uses as well, because I'm older than I look actually. Uh,
Me too.
well, it's probably a good thing, better than the other way around.
That's right.
Um, But now I really don't know. I would say that like the good thing about the internet is also the bad thing about the internet. Is that everything you want is out there if you're willing to spend enough time. So just go and watch YouTube videos. If you don't understand something, if you don't understand aspect ratios and the relationship the different aspect ratios will have to the film you want to make, find 12 videos on YouTube about aspect ratios. Eight of them will probably be slightly irritating and you won't learn much. Two of them, or maybe you'll get a little something. Just, I feel like, yeah, I can't recommend a single book. That was my simple answer. I can't recommend a simple single book, and I can't give you a simple answer. I would say there used to be a film channel on YouTube called Every Frame a Painting or Every
Hmm.
Frame a Picture. I don't think the guy that runs it makes anything anymore. Um,
That's a great title.
yeah, and that I think that's for me because I'm coming at it from more from the kind of arty side, I guess. For me, it should be the aim of a good film is that you can pause it at any point and be like, wow, you could hang that on the wall.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
me, that's what I aspire to. That channel used to be fantastic because it really went
Hmm.
into the film history and the technical aspect of filmmaking. So there was books and courses. Not really. Honestly, no. I think for me, the best education is what we've already spoken about. You go and watch 10 films from the masters. For me, I went back and watched nearly every John Ford Western. Not because I don't want to make a Western that's anything like a John Ford
Right,
Western,
right.
other than maybe, The Searchers or something like that is closer to what I would want to do. But I watched them all when I was a kid or when I was younger, so I went back and watched most of them, and I learned a lot. Because when you watch John Ford, it's just amazing. Also, just to see how they did things back then and think about how it's changed. Because I mean, when John Ford wanted to make a stagecoach be chased by Native Americans and hurtle down a cliff, he had to do it. They had to do it, you know? And
Yeah.
go back and watch the Masters. That's the best thing. And if you don't understand a technical thing, there are so many people willing to give you the benefit of their experience online.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think famously there was a woman who went through a divorce, unfortunately, and she did not have a house and decided, she never picked up a hammer, but she just decided, I'm gonna make a house or build a house.
Excellent.
And she built a single family home of which her family now lives in. It's a true story. And she
Wow.
solely taught herself by using YouTube videos. So to your point about getting out there, she had a specific question, and dang if there's not something on it, and
Yeah.
this can be said about film. And I also highly believe in part of your scales is watching the classics and watching the masters. And one of the things somebody told me to do, and I often check this, is the American Film Institute, AFI. They
Hmm.
have their famous top 100 films. And in
Yeah.
the Hollywood industry, in the studio system, they used to talk about it's this meets that. And you were expected to know the 100 films because they would use those as frame of reference with the expectation that you would know it's, Twister meets Jaws. And you'd be able to go, okay, I understand what that is. So you can go through in the American film market, if you go to their website, they actually have a downloadable PDF where you can check them off and
Wow.
just
Yeah.
see how many films you watched. And when I first did this, Anthony, I only saw like 35 out of the 100. And so I went on just a rage of like, all right, I got to knock these out. And some of the films I had to like go and like really find. They were not
Mm.
easy to find. And I'm so glad I did because now I'm like at 89 out of the 100. And every year a few drop off and a few get added on. So I highly encourage you, the listener, if you haven't, and you too, Anthony, if you haven't done it, go to the AFI Top 100 and just see how many you can check off. And you'll be surprised and you'll be like, dang, I heard about that film and I've always meant to watch it. And it's like, you know what? Tonight's the night, man. Tonight's it.
Yeah,
Because then you can
definitely.
go right on IMDb, and IMDb tells you here's where you can watch it, and it'll show you the three or four places where you can watch it, which is great. All right, Anthony, what are you working on next? Where can people find you? How can we support you, brother?
Can I just actually say, you
Yeah,
mentioned something that just feeds back into what we were talking about
yeah,
earlier, that I wish I'd have had the intelligence and the kind of, quickness of mind to mention back then. And I think it's a real key point. When we were talking about what's gone wrong with Hollywood, it used to be a time, I think, that the people in Hollywood, even if they were business orientated, they appreciated film and they understood film and they loved
Oh, yeah.
film, you
Yeah.
know? And I think now the real problem is that studio executives couldn't care less, most of them, I think, about film itself. And there's a funny story about Steve McQueen's son. He went in to see an exec. So this was already quite a while back. He went in to see an executive at, I think, Warner Brothers, and he said, "I want to remake The Great Escape." And the guy was like, "What's The Great Escape?"
Oh my
He was
God.
like, "Well, my father, Steve McQueen, was in it. I never heard of it. Don't know what it is." And I think it's only got worse since then. I mean, if you were to go to, and I mean, there must be some that have, but I think the days of people that run Hollywood studios having to know what Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil and all of these films are, I think that's gone. And I think that's a huge loss to film in general. So sorry, how can people support me and find what I'm doing?
Yeah.
The Western that I'm setting out to make now, which I don't want to encourage the universe to give me bad luck by saying too many things with any certainty at this point. Because as you know, the whole thing is a house of cards that even when it looks like you're just about to put it could all fall from underneath
Oh,
you. The film I'm working on is called Where the Sparrows Fly. It's going to have some fantastic actors and actresses in it. One of whom I can't mention at the moment, but it's going to have Beth Grant from Donnie Darko and No Country for Old Men, Larry Cedar from Deadwood, and Jim Beaver, Chris Mulkey. So many incredible actors and actresses. Hopefully, by this time next year, it's going to be something that people will be able to watch. Um, if they want to send me money and support me that way, hey, get in touch. You're welcome to. But otherwise, just keep an eye out. And if people see the film streaming somewhere one day, please watch it. Watch it. Watch it. If you want to pay for it and watch it, great. If you want to steal it and watch it on an illegal streaming website, well, I'm not going to judge you. I don't know how much money you have in your pocket. Um, and just don't just support me, support all independent filmmakers. But if people want to find out about me, I don't release too much music these days because I don't have the time. But keep a lookout for Where the Sparrows Fly. One day I hope you'll see it. That's the film from the guy whose podcast I listen to. I'll go and check that out.
Yeah. No, we vote every time we go to the movie theater, we rent a movie, we vote. And we vote with our dollars, and we should be doing that for the artist's sake. And so I would highly encourage you to consider following Anthony, following up with his film. I know I'll be excited to see it. I'll be first in line, man.
Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate it. Can I ask you a question before you
Sure.
go? I know it kind of flips the format,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it maybe not at all, but how do you think your experience as a police officer influenced the way that you approach making film?
Oh, I definitely think it has for sure. One, it does on one side of it, the work ethic. I did midnights for 3 years. I worked holidays and weekends and missed time with family. And I know the sacrifice that a calling like that can have on your life. And honestly, Anthony, the truth is one of the reasons I got out of it is I love doing it, but I also knew I wasn't called necessarily fully to it. It was a season for
Mhm.
it. And I knew that too. And I knew I was called into filmmaking. And ironically, I made a film with a cop buddy of mine back in 2000. And that's what got me addicted well, that's what got me where I could see where it was possible at that point. That's when digital first started to come on. But I also saw, you talked about the human condition and humanity and the depravity of that. And I believe, Anthony, that there is a lot of darkness in this world and in this
Mm.
life. And I believe the
Unfortunately.
world needs stories of hope and light. I'm okay with a tragedy. I really am. I'm okay with a tragedy, but I'm drawn and really get fired up about films that can leave me hopeful and show that you can get out of it and you can rise above. And I do like the come from behind and the overcomer story. And a lot of that does go back to, unfortunately, what I saw as a cop. And it wasn't like so crazy. There were a lot of nights, frankly, that you're just in your cruiser and doing your thing. But I would be lying if I didn't see some things and was taught some lessons. And we're really close to Washington, D.C. So you do get some like higher end crime, if you will. Some of it was fascinating from like a criminal kind of point of view, and
Yeah, of
great
course.
storytelling elements kind of rose up from that. But some of it was also just tragic. And as we all know in life, the reason we need stories of hope, in my mind, is because unfortunately in life, we don't always rise up. We don't always make the right decisions. And people, unfortunately, get taken out of this life too early, not having the ability to have a second chance. And unfortunately, I saw those things, and I want to show that you don't have to live kind of with the cards that you're dealt, and you can come back from things. And it was like during a cop where I saw um, the need, frankly, for that, particularly in like kids. I saw it in
Hmm.
kids' eyes when they're around that a lot, that they need hope. And I'm not saying I do like family friendly films all the time, although I have. That's not where I'm drawn to. I'm drawn to stories of hope and light, and it was probably a direct result. I know it was definitely influenced by my time as a cop. Yeah.
That's really interesting. And what's the film of yours that you think I should go and watch? What's the film that you're happiest with that you've made?
Oh, that I've made?
Mm.
Um, the most honest one was a film called Rise of the Fellowship. And it's a coming of age story about these four geeky gamers that go on this journey that kind of parallels Lord of the Rings. And they learn that there's a little bit of geek and hero in all of us, because I think that's true. We're all geeky about something, and yet we all have the ability to be a hero. And I was
Yeah.
fortunate enough to where I couldn't get an A-list actor in my movie because, to your point, I didn't have a seat at the table. I couldn't pay the piper, but I did get permission to use the Lord of the Rings video game in my movie, which, as you know, tying yourself to a strong IP, that's the main reason why I did get a really good distribution deal as a result of that. And I'm not saying I made like millions or anything, but I did get a good deal because I attached myself to a nice IP. And they were shocked that I did that. But if you watch the film, they tried to sell it as like this fantasy action adventure, and it's anything but that. It's a coming of age story about this teenage group of friends. And I still love the film. I think there's actually some really strong cinematic marks. Because of the way they tried to market it, we kind of did get killed in the rating, there was a little bit of, I wouldn't call it backlash, but certainly people, yeah, they even made the DVD cover because it was really hot during DVDs at that time. The DVD cover looked like a Lord of the Rings knockoff. And again, it wasn't
Mm.
that at all. And they tried to sell it that. And I even told our distributor, like, hey, I'm going to take a beating online because people are going to watch this and be like, hey, this wasn't Lord of the Rings. This is about some geeky kid. But I love the
Ah,
purity of it. I think there's still some great shots. My kids weren't even around, of course, back then, and I brought it out not too long ago, and I watched it with them. And I have to say, I'm very proud of it. It still holds up in my mind. It was nice storytelling, and I think shot well. It's not perfect, but nothing is. But dang,
I
if
was going to say, what's perfect? Nothing is perfect.
exactly. So I'm definitely proud about that one. There is a short film called Outlawed Faith that was a little bit of a Tarantino kind of take with it, where my little brother was in it, and unfortunately, we lost him unexpectedly a couple years back. So I love that
I'm
film
sorry
that I
to hear
was
that.
able to. Yeah, thank you. He was a great guy and loved to act, and he was in that film, and then he was also in my fantasy as like a barkeep, and he was
Mm.
the in this tavern in this western steampunk western thing I did. That's the Outlawed Faith thing, and he played the barkeep, which was a ton of fun. And so we got a lot of eyeballs on that one, a lot of interest. I'm actually working on the novel right now of that
Oh,
story,
interesting.
so it was definitely a fun one. But I still love Rise of the Fellowship. That's still one I think.
Where can I see it? Can I see it somewhere at the moment?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely online, all over. I actually for a time had it up on Netflix, but they go through like a season, like
Yeah,
every
they
years it kind of rolls
exactly. Yeah.
off, and yeah. So it's definitely on Amazon. I think it's also on Roku and Tubi. So on Tubi, it's free. So you just got to watch it with ads, but Tubi's free. So I think it's still on there. And funny enough, man, all these years later, I just got to check, a couple weeks ago. So I'm very grateful that it's still,
Great.
to me, it's not about the money because it was just a little bit, but it's about the reach, the audience. Like there's still
Yeah.
some geeky kid out there that found this little story and maybe he has now hope that he can be a hero in his own life and his geekiness doesn't have to be demeaned. And that's really kind of was what it was about. So, yeah, no, I appreciate you asking for sure. It was very
No,
kind
you're
of you.
more than welcome, man. Because
Yeah.
it's nice to know something about yourself as well. And I don't know
Yeah.
how
No,
often,
thank you.
as the podcast host, I don't know how often people that listen to the
Yeah, very
podcast
little. Yeah.
get to hear about yourself. So,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, I hope this isn't our last conversation, Ron. And
Same.
it's thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure, especially as someone who, is at the start of their filmmaking journey. It's a pleasure to have been invited to come on and to share my story.
Absolutely. No, I think we need to stick together, Anthony. So I'm sure this is not going to be our last. And, if you do sincerely, if you do need something, please do reach out. I appreciate your time today for coming on. And I appreciate you all for watching and listening. Don't forget, like, subscribe, leave a comment so Anthony and I know that you checked this out. It really does kind of help the channel. But I believe we're good to conclude our discussion with Anthony Saggers. Did I get that right this time?
Yes, you did, man. Very good.
Awesome. And remember, nothing is wasted.